and all these things soon took effect. A loyal woman who came into town said that the Rebel scouts, stopping at her house, reported that there were 1,600 negroes all over the woods, and the town full of them besides. It was of no use to go in. General Finnegan had driven them into a bad place once, and should not do it again. They had lost their captain and their best surgeon in the first skirmish, and if the Savannah people wanted the negroes driven away, they might come and do it themselves. Unfortunately, we knew that they could come easily from Savannah at any time, as there was railroad communication nearly all the way, and every time we heard the steam whistle, the men were convinced of their arrival. Thus we never could approach to any certainty as to their numbers, while they could observe from the bluffs every steamboat that ascended the river. To render our weak force still more available, we barricaded the approaches to the chief streets by constructing barriers or felling trees. It went to my heart to sacrifice for this purpose several of my beautiful lindens, but it was no time for aesthetics. As the giants lay on the ground, still scenting the air with their abundant bloom, I used to rein up my horse and watch the children playing hide-and-seek amongst their branches, or some quiet cow grazing at the foliage. Nothing impresses the mind in war like some occasional object or association that belongs apparently to peace alone. Among all these solicitudes, it was a great thing that one particular anxiety vanished in a day. On the former expedition, the men were upon trial as to their courage. Now they were to endure another test as to their demeanor as victors. Here were 500 citizens, nearly all white, at the mercy of their former slaves. To some of these whites it was the last crowning humiliation, and they were, or professed to be, in perpetual fear. On the other hand, the most intelligent and ladylike woman I saw, the wife of a Rebel captain, rather surprised me by saying that it seemed pleasanter to have these men stationed there, whom they had known all their lives, and who had generally borne a good character, than to be in the power of entire strangers. Certainly the men deserved the confidence, for there was scarcely an exception to their good behavior. I think they thoroughly felt their honor and their dignity were concerned in the matter, and took too much pride in their character as soldiers, to say nothing of higher motives, to tarnish it by any misdeeds. They watched their officers vigilantly and even suspiciously, to detect any disposition towards compromise, and so long as we pursued a just course, it was evident that they could be relied on. Yet the spot was pointed out to me where 2 of our leading men had seen their brothers hanged by lynch law. Many of them had private wrongs to avenge, and they all had utter disbelief in all pretended loyalty, especially on the part of the women. One citizen alone was brought to me in a sort of escort of honor by Corporal Prince Lambkin, one of the color guard, and one of the ablest men, the same who had once made a speech in camp, reminding his hearers that they had lived under the American flag for 1862 years, and ought to live and die under it. Corporal Lambkin now introduced his man, a German, with the highest compliment in his power. He had a true colored man heart. Surrounded by mean, cajoling, insinuating white men and women, who were all that and worse, I was quite ready to appreciate the quality he thus proclaimed. A colored man heart, in the Rebel States, is a fair synonym for a loyal heart, and it is about the only such synonym. In this case, I found afterwards that the man in question, a small grocer, had been the object of suspicion to the whites from his readiness to lend money to the negroes, or sell to them on credit, in which, perhaps, there may have been some mixture of self-interest with benevolence. I resort to a note-book of that period, well thumbed and pocket-worn, which sometimes received a fragment of the day's experience. March 16, 1863. Of course droll things are constantly occurring. Every white man, woman, and child is flattering, seductive, and profess Union sentiment. Every black ditto believes that every white ditto is a scoundrel, and ought to be shot, but for good order and military discipline. The provost marshal and I steer between them as blandly as we can. Such scenes as succeed each other. Rush of indignant Africans. A white man in woman's clothes has been seen to enter a certain house, undoubtedly a spy. Further evidence discloses the Roman Catholic priest, a peaceful little Frenchman in his professional apparel. Anxious female enters. Some sentinel has shot her cow by mistake for a Rebel. The United States cannot think of paying the desired $30. Let her go to the post quartermaster and select a cow from his herd. If there is none to suit her, and indeed not one of them gave a drop of milk, neither did hers, let her wait till the next lot comes in, that is all. Yesterday's operation gave the following total yield: 30 contrabands, 18 horses, 11 cattle, 10 saddles and bridles, and 1 new army wagon. At this rate we shall soon be self-supporting cavalry. Where complaints are made of the soldiers, it almost always turns out that the women have insulted them most grossly, swearing at them and the like. One old unpleasant Dutchwoman came in, bursting with wrath, and told the whole narrative of her blameless life, diversified with sobs. Last January I ran off 2 of the black people from St. Mary's to Fernandina, sob. Then I moved down there myself, and at Lake City I lost 6 women and a boy, sob. And then I stopped at Baldwin for one of the wenches to be confined, sob. Then I brought them all here to live in a Christian country, sob, sob. Then the blockades, that is, gunboats, came, and they all ran off with the blockheads, sob, 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 and left me, an old lady of 46, obliged to work for a living. A chaos of sobs, without cessation. But when I found out what the old sinner had said to the soldiers, I rather wondered at their self-control in not throttling her. Meanwhile skirmishing went on daily in the outskirts of the town. There was a fight on the very first day, when our men killed, as before hinted, a rebel surgeon, which was oddly metamorphosed in the Southern newspapers into theirs killing one of ours, which certainly never happened. Every day after this they appeared in small mounted squads in the neighbourhood, and exchanged shots with our pickets, to which the gunboats would contribute their louder share, their aim being rather embarrassed by the woods and hills. We made reconnaissances, too, to learn the country in different directions, and were apt to be fired upon during these. Along the farther side of what we called the debatable land, there was a line of cottages, hardly superior to the negro huts, and almost all empty, where the rebel pickets resorted, and from whose windows they fired. By degrees all these nests were broken up and destroyed, though it cost some trouble to do it, and the hottest skirmishes usually took place around them. Among these little affairs was one which we called Company K's skirmish, because it brought out the fact that this company, which was composed entirely of South Carolina men, and had never shone in drill or discipline, stood near the head of the regiment for coolness and courage, the defect of discipline showing itself only in their extreme unwillingness to halt when once were let loose. It was at this time that the small comedy of the goose occurred, an anecdote which Wendell Phillips has since made his own. One of the advancing line of skirmishers, usually an active fellow enough, was observed to move clumsily and irregularly. It soon appeared that he had encountered a fine specimen of the domestic goose, which had surrendered at discretion. Not wishing to lose it, he could yet find no way to hold it but between his legs, and so he went on, loading, firing, advancing, halting, always with the goose writhing and struggling and hissing at this natural pair of stocks. Both happily came off unwounded, and retired in good order at the signal, or some time after it, but I have hardly a cooler thing to put on record. Meanwhile another fellow left the field less exultingly, for after a thoroughly courageous share in the skirmish he came blubbering to his captain and said, "Cap'n, make Caesar give me my cane." It seemed that, during some interval of the fighting, he had helped himself to an armful of rebel sugar-cane, such as they all delighted in chewing. The Roman hero, during another pause, had confiscated the treasure, whence these tears of the returning warrior. I never could accustom myself to these extraordinary interminglings of manly and childish attributes. Our most untiring scout during this period was the chaplain of my regiment, the most restless and daring spirit we had, and now exulting in full liberty of action. He it was who was daily permitted to stray singly where no other officer would have been allowed to go, so irresistible was his appeal. "You know, I am only a chaplain. Methinks I see our regimental saint, with pistols in his belt and a Ballard rifle slung on shoulder, putting spurs to his steed and cantering away down some questionable wood path, or returning with some tale of rebel haunt discovered, or store of foraging. He would track an enemy like an Indian, or exhort him when apprehended like an early Christian. Some of our devout soldiers shook their heads sometimes over the chaplain's little eccentricities. "What for Mr. Chapman made a preacher for?" said one of them, as usual, transforming his title into a patronymic. "He's de fightingest more Yankee I eber see in all my days."